Coming up on Dr. Kiki's Science Hour, we're talking about the origins of the universe and other small questions with Dr. Lawrence Krauss from Arizona State University. That's up next on Dr. Kiki's Science Hour.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for Dr. Kiki's Science Hour is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Dr. Kiki's Science Hour with me, Dr. Kiki, episode 137, recorded Thursday, March 22nd, 2012, Something from Nothing. This episode of Dr. Kiki's Science Hour is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies on your PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or TV instantly, all streamed directly to you, saving you time, money, and hassle. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. Welcome, everyone, to Dr. Kiki's Science Hour. I'm Dr. Kiki, and as you know, this is the hour that we get to spend discussing a single topic in the sciences with an expert in that subject. And today, we've got a special treat. We're going to be digging into some, little questions. Not anything very big. Where did our universe come from? How did it get its start? Did it come from something? Did it come from nothing? Oh, yeah. And why was Richard Feynman so cool? All this we will be discussing this hour with our guest, Dr. Lawrence Krauss from Arizona State University. But first, a few science headlines. Today is March 22nd, 2012, and these are the science headlines that made news this week. The world's first 2 megajoule ultraviolet laser was fired at the National Ignition Facility, or NIF, in Livermore, California. If you've watched TWiT's Green Tech Today series, you'll be aware from the tour that we filmed that the facility's target for laser ignition of the Golden Holerum was 1.8 megajoules, and the laser is really made up of 192 lasers aimed carefully at the center of a spherical chamber with the goal of creating nuclear fusion. NIF hopes to achieve ignition before the end of the fiscal year, so we don't have long to wait for some real results. Tell you, I'm excited about that. Results of observations by NASA's Messenger spacecraft were reported in Science this week, and planetary scientists are scratching their heads. Data suggests that Mercury was tectonically active until at least 2 billion years ago and has a solid shell surrounding its molten core that isn't present in any other planet in our solar system. The U.S. Geological Survey and NASA released the first geological map of Io, Jupiter's highly volcanic moon. The map was assembled using images taken by NASA's Voyager mission and the Galileo orbiter. 8,000 years of human history in Syria have been unearthed from space by MIT and Harvard researchers. The study, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, used satellites to image the reflectivity of the soil, which changes based on the presence of compounds called anthrasols that are left behind by decayed human wastes. The method allowed the team to track human movements, pinpoint major settlements, and even suggests that water isn't necessary for settlements to form. Ken Caldera and Nathan Mervold report in the journal Environmental Research Letters that natural gas, while a fine source of energy, is not the bridge between coal-based electricity generation and low greenhouse gas emission energy that the U.S. government suggests it is. Rather, emphasis should be placed on new technologies incorporating conservation, solar, wind, nuclear, and possibly carbon capture and storage. However, Richard York writes in Nature Climate Change that over the past 50 years, renewable resources of energy have barely kept up with increasing energy demands of the world. The results of this study suggest that to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, we will either need to reduce our energy demands or expand the adoption of alternative energy sources. Canadian oil sands are supposed to be one of the largest sources for oil on the planet, but extracting the oil from the sand is costly. A new study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences hints that it might be even more costly than previously thought. carbon sequestration potential of the mining sites will be drastically diminished due to the loss of existing peaty wetlands as a result of mining operations and diminished ability of the post-mining lands to sequester carbon. The paper estimates that between 11 and 48 million tons of carbon that is currently fixed into the peat will be freed, and Ars Technica equates this to 7 years of emissions from the mining operations. Is that like 7 years of bad luck for breaking a mirror? Anyway, a study in the journal Psychological Science finds that perception is everything when it comes to golf. By changing the perceived size of a golf hole to make it appear smaller or larger, they changed the performance of golfers accordingly. The Tennessee Senate passed a bill that protects teachers from being punished for, quote, helping students to understand, analyze, critique, and review in an objective manner the scientific strengths and weaknesses of existing scientific theories. The American Association for the Advancement of Science, National Center for Science Education, and the American Civil Liberties Union opposed the bill, saying it is an indirect way to allow the teaching of creationism or intelligent design in the classroom. Trees do more than create oxygen for us to breathe. According to a paper out of Queensland University of Technology, they also act as pumps for radon, releasing it into the air through transpiration. The scientists estimate that as much as 37% of radon ions in a eucalyptus forest might come from the trees, and those ions might be involved in atmospheric electrification. Kind of interesting there. If you have ever experienced altitude sickness, you know how uncomfortable it can make you feel, and to some, it can even be deadly. Recent research shows that ibuprofen taken before ascending to altitude is successful in reducing severity of altitude sickness symptoms. In the study, it reduced incidence of illness by 26%. If you never got a chance to fly on the supersonic Concorde jet before it was retired, in part as a result of too many complaints about the noise of the sonic boom heard by people on the ground, you may yet get a chance to go supersonic. Researchers at MIT have developed a model of a modified biplane. That's right, a plane with two wings on each side that would produce less drag at supersonic speeds than conventional designs, and that would produce less of a boom. We just have to wait and see if the model can fly. And that does it for the science headlines this week. Let me know what you think about these science news stories, or tell me what you think should be news by emailing Dr. Kiki at drkiki.tv. And leave me a voicemail, not a voicemail. That would be hard to chew. 650-741-5454. I appreciate your input. And now I'd like to thank the sponsor of our show, Netflix. This episode is brought to you by Netflix, and Netflix streams thousands of movies, TV shows, episodes instantly to you, directly to you in your home or your computer or your mobile device, wherever you are, which means that you save time, money, and hassle. There are several easy ways to instantly access Netflix using all sorts of manners. So you can watch Netflix movies and TV shows on your Mac, your PC, your iPad, even your iPhone, and some Android devices as well. There are apps for these in the marketplaces. You can watch on a gaming console. So maybe you don't have an iPhone or a computer, but you have a gaming console. You play games. Xbox 360, PS3, Nintendo Wii. You can watch it right on your TV using one of these devices. Or there are inexpensive, easy-to-use set-top devices like the Roku box, the Boxy Box, or Apple TVs. Those also allow you to access Netflix movies and TV shows instantly. And you can begin watching a movie or a show on any one of these devices, stop if you get interrupted, and then you can pick it up wherever you left off on another device. It's a seamless interface. It's really a great design. Whichever way you choose to access Netflix, it's easy for you to use, and you can cancel at any time. You can watch as much as you want and then cancel whenever you want. And we've got a special deal for you. You can get 30 days of Netflix for free if you sign up right now. Go to netflix.com/twit. That's netflix.com/twit. Sign up there using that URL, netflix.com/twit, to get your free 30 days. We thank Netflix for their support of TWiT and Dr. Kiki Science Hour, and hope that you enjoy watching instantly with Netflix. Now, I'd love to introduce our guest. Dr. Lawrence Krauss is a renowned cosmologist. He's a science popularizer, and he is the foundation professor in the School of Earth and Space Exploration and director of the Origins Project at Arizona State University. He's hailed by Scientific American as a rare public intellectual. He is also the author of more than 300 scientific publications and 9 books, including the international bestseller, The Physics of Star Trek, one of my favorites. And his most recent book is also a bestseller, A Universe from Nothing. He received his PhD from MIT in 1982 and then joined the Society of Fellows at Harvard and was professor at Yale University and chair of the physics department at Case Western Reserve University before ending up in his current position. Dr. Krauss, thank you for joining me today and welcome to the show.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's wonderful to meet you. I know how prolific you are in writing, and also as Scientific American has put you as being a public intellectual. I read things that you've written, and your name pops up all over the place. Does that get a little tiring, being so public with your ideas?
Well, it's sometimes it surprises me. Most recently, when Miley Cyrus tweeted about my new book, I guess.
Yeah.
It's surprising, and I also wonder whether people get tired of seeing me or hearing me. But anyway, that's not my problem, I guess.
Yeah, that side of the equation isn't necessarily your problem, but
well, but I try to judiciously choose when I will appear, which is why I judiciously chose to appear on your program.
And I thank you. I definitely thank you for it. So tell me a little bit about how I am fascinated by people like you who are scientists, and you break the common stereotype of a scientist in a lab coat, working in the lab and never talking to anybody. Here you are, in a Hawaiian shirt. You look very comfortable. You're very personable, and how did you get to be where you are today? What path did you follow?
Well, that's a good question, I guess. Actually, the simple answer, I suppose, is that I got fascinated by science when I was a kid, but partly because neither of my parents went to college, but my mother wanted me to be a doctor and my brother to be a lawyer. But she made the mistake of telling me that doctors were scientists. And I got interested in science. And then what really happened is I started reading books by scientists when I was a kid, about scientists first. I remember when I was a kid reading a book about Galileo, and I think that fascinated me. But then by scientists, books by Albert Einstein and George Gamow and people like that. And that got me fascinated with what I thought was the most exciting intellectual adventure anyone could take, which was trying to understand how the universe worked. And by that time I was hooked, and I discovered doctors weren't scientists, and my mother was very upset for a long time. It took her a long time to come to grips with that fact. I remember when I was at Harvard, she still said, I got messages that she still thought I had time to go to medical school. But anyway, I think that's one of the reasons, by the way, that I write books, I think, when I think about it, to return the favor. I got turned on to science by scientists who wrote about science. And it's one of the most exciting things for me now, and I've been writing for long enough that this happens, that when a young person who's not necessarily so young anymore comes up and says, reading The Physics of Star Trek, say, turned me on to physics, and now I'm a scientist. I just think that's a great thing to have happen. So, I guess I was torn. I've always loved science, but I've also been intimately interested in human affairs, I guess. And for a while it was a problem for me because I thought science was kind of impersonal. And I did history for a while. And I think writing was a way for me to merge my, I love doing my science, but writing is a way for me to connect to people. And it's opened up lots of opportunities for me to connect to people in different ways. And I guess I like those opportunities and those adventures. In fact, Richard Feynman once told me to, always seek out adventures. And I guess that's opened up doors to do the strangest things. I get asked to do many things that are highly unusual. And I like that. And I think for me, it takes away from the time I spend in research. And let me say that I think it's vitally important for me, at least, to be able to, I'd kind of feel like a fraud if I wasn't doing science at the same time as talking about it. But, and it gives me great pleasure to have the the privilege of sitting around in the middle of the night thinking about the universe. But I don't think I would be satisfied just doing that. I think the need to connect beyond academia has been always an important one for me, and probably writing, which has led to other things, was one way to do it. I used to do acting when I was a kid. So it's all connected and it's all fun.
Yeah, sounds like you've had a very interesting life so far. That it's.
Yeah, I guess there's a saying you're not supposed to have one, but anyway, it's the old Jewish saying, God protect you from an interesting life. But mine has been interesting in many ways.
That's fantastic. I was going to save questions about Richard Feynman until the end, but since you've brought him up,
I opened the can of worms.
You opened the can of worms. You wrote one of your books, The Quantum Man, was about Richard Feynman, and so you've met him. Did you study with him? How did you know him, and what led you to write the book about him?
Okay, well, it's good, all good questions so far.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Well, what happened was I met him as a young person. I mean, he'd had an influence on me, as he did many young physicists, at a very early age. In fact, when I was in high school, I was on some summer science program for, gifted kids or whatever it's for, and the teacher saw I was bored, and he brought down this book by this guy Feynman and said, this guy just won the Nobel Prize for discovering that antiparticles are particles that go backwards in time, and why don't you read this chapter? It was fascinating. Of course, I discovered that, in fact, the teacher was wrong about, as often happens. He hadn't just won it, and anyway. And I didn't understand the book when I saw it, but one of the things that did impact on me, as I remember, was kind of the first experience I'd had that science was still alive. I mean, it wasn't just done by dead white men hundreds of years earlier.
Right.
And that there were really fundamental, interesting questions still to ask. And I'm not sure I really appreciated that beforehand. And so I think, in some sense, that really turned me on to the idea that there were really exciting things, puzzles that I might be able to answer and I might be able to be the first one to understand. And so Feynman had that inspirational effect for me. And then when I was an undergraduate, I was fortunate enough to be at a meeting where Feynman came. I was an undergraduate in Canada, and there was a national summer school, or it wasn't a summer school, but national conference of undergraduate students. I later became the president of that association. But and there was a very, I guess it's fair to say, attractive young woman that year who was the president of it, and she somehow convinced Richard Feynman to come up to Vancouver to the meeting, and it turned out that, well, I got to talk to him during the meeting, but it also turned out I was there with my girlfriend at the time, who was the only other woman. And so Feynman spent a lot of time with us, and spent much of the weekend at us with bars. And I guess, I don't know if I said this in public, but he taught me how to dance. And we, as I said, we talked a little physics. I didn't really understand enough to get a great sense of it. In fact, I actually have it on right behind me, but you can't see it. Here's a picture of me and Feynman. It was taken by some physics magazine. We happened to be talking physics, which was nice. But anyway, so that was an amazing experience for a young person. But then many years later, when I was at Harvard, I went to Caltech to give a colloquium, and Feynman was in the audience, which is always a little unnerving. And he asked a number of questions, good questions. He was always interested in things. And then afterwards, he came up to talk to me, and I was really excited. I wanted to remind him. I'm sure he didn't remember me as an undergraduate, but some really annoying assistant professor kept asking me questions and wouldn't stop asking him. And Feynman politely waited around by the side for about 10 or 15 minutes and then walked away. And I thought, okay, well, I'll have another chance to talk to him. But Feynman died shortly after it, and I never got a chance to let him know about it. So maybe the book was cathartic in that sense, and a chance for me to repay him somehow. But what really happened is that basically I got asked to write the book. There's a series called Great Discoveries, which is about great scientists in one way or another. And they contacted me and said, would you write a book about Richard Feynman? And I guess I was really flattered to be asked. But for me, whenever I write a book, I want to be honest about it. To some extent, the book is as much for me as anyone else. I have to get something out of it. And in this case, I thought it would motivate me to read all Feynman's papers. One of the things that people don't realize about physics in particular, and it's probably true for a number of the other sciences, is that you rarely go back to the original literature. Ideas get refined and distilled and recreated and made simpler and simpler and simpler. So if you go back to the original papers of, say, James Clerk Maxwell in the 19th century, they're almost impenetrable because we refined it. And so I hadn't read many of Feynman's papers. I've looked at a few, but I had them all. And I thought, well, this will motivate me to read the papers. So it was motivation for me to spend the time. And I thought it'd be an easy book to write, but it took 3 years.
Wow.
And it was a challenge. But I wanted to write, I was asked to write a scientific biography of Richard Feynman because the point is there's lots of anecdotal biographies. Feynman wrote lots of best-selling books full of anecdotes, and there have been other kind of biographies about Feynman as a curious character and all of that. But what really made Feynman important was his legacy in science. I thought I wanted to write a book that Feynman would have wanted to be written about him in some sense, or I hoped he would. And in fact, I'm very happy that after I wrote it, a number of distinguished scientists basically said just that. And in fact, I guess for me, one of the most happy moments was when Freeman Dyson, who's a very distinguished physicist, will be joining me here next week, actually, in Arizona, and a contemporary of Feynman's, and wrote in the New York Review of Books that I was sort of the first book that captured how Feynman really thought, and I thought that was a wonderful thing. So anyway, it was a labor of love, and it was fascinating for me to learn a lot about Feynman and his science that I hadn't understood before, but to try and weave it in his life. Each book I write, let me also, when you write about science, you've got to figure out how to get people interested because, even though, in fact, everyone is interested in science, they just don't know they're interested. They don't
know they're interested yet, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so you have to, everything in my mind is seduction. Life is seduction.
I agree. Yeah,
I'm glad you agree. The thing I'm often asked to talk to physics teachers or teachers in general, and I tell them the biggest mistake they make, and it's probably true of teachers or TV hosts or anyone else, is that the biggest mistake you make is assuming your audience is interested in what you have to say, and so what you have to do is seduce them. You have to convince them on the basis of what they're interested in, and so I've tried to do that. And the physics of Star Trek was an example of using Star Trek to seduce people into understanding the real universe, which of course is much more interesting than Star Trek.
Isn't it, though? Yeah.
And I think it is. We can have that debate. But in the Feynman book was to use Feynman, the character, the curious character, which everyone was interested in. In fact, I had no idea, just as I really didn't understand how widely Star Trek permeated the world, I really had no idea how deeply Feynman's mystique had permeated people around the world until I wrote the book. But I wanted to use that as a hook. People were interested enough in Feynman, so they might read a book about Feynman, and in the process, I could sneak in all that science and seduce them into reading it without knowing that they were getting it. And so that was the idea.
I love that. Was there anything you mentioned that you learned a lot more about his science and about him as a man, but was there anything that really surprised you about the way that his life and his science wove together?
Well, I think I guess I thought about things that I kind of knew a little bit about before that I thought were interesting. For example, the fact that for many people World War II was a bad thing.
Yeah.
But for Feynman, it was the best thing that ever could have happened to him. Not only did it take him out of what would have been a very boring and tragic life with his first wife, who would have died in a community much like Princeton, New Jersey, or some other boring place. And it took them west to Los Alamos, where before she died, they had adventures and excitement that I think was wonderful for the two of them. They were deeply in love. But it also took Feynman, the graduate student, who was known to be brilliant to a small group of people at Princeton, and put him with the best minds in the world. And within 3 years, even though he hadn't published a physics paper, he was known to those people as one of the brightest young scientists in the world, and that set him on a career that he might not have had otherwise. And I think so for him, in a sense, the accident of World War II was of vital importance because it put him in contact with, among other people, Hans Bethe, who was one of the greatest theorists of his time, and Feynman's mentor. Bethe was also won the Nobel Prize for figuring out how the sun works. And it affected Feynman's attitude and his understanding of science tremendously. So those kind of accidents, the way they affected his science, is one thing. And then, of course, there's the fact that if you think about it, as I tried to do in the I hate to give away the punchline of my book because it's the last page, so people won't buy it maybe if I tell them this, but that's
I think there's a whole book there, though.
Yeah, I like to think so.
Yeah.
But so, I got one of the things I did was contact several friends of mine who knew Feynman and well-known physicists and get their perceptions. And at the end of the book, I talk a little bit about that. And one of them is Barry Barish, who's a friend of mine at Caltech and a well-known experimental physicist. And he lived near Feynman, and he told me a story that I just thought was a perfect way to wrap up the book, which is, you see, Feynman won the Nobel Prize for something called the path integral approach to quantum mechanics, realizing the strange fact that you could understand quantum mechanics by saying that electrons, or elementary particles, unlike baseballs, if I throw a baseball across the room, it takes a trajectory described by Newton's laws. Mm-hmm. But if I throw an electron across the room, it takes every path possible at the same time. It goes to the moon and back, and it does all those things at the same time. And as crazy as that sounds, it's true. And Feynman's formalism showed that. So anyway, Barry was telling me that they would sometimes walk together to Caltech, and Feynman one day asked him if he'd seen a certain house on a certain street, and Barry said no, because he always took the same route to Caltech. And Feynman, it turned out, never took the same path twice. And I thought that was just so poetic that I couldn't resist, because just like the particles, Feynman tried every path. He explored every possible trajectory in his life. And in some sense, I guess I was inspired by that. And in my own life, it comes back to the question you asked at the beginning, what motivated you to do a lot of different things? And I guess Feynman, in some sense, and it gave it that by example. And he really loved, even though he loved doing physics, there's no doubt he got a great kick of some of the other opportunities that came his way, partly because of the Nobel Prize and his notoriety. And I guess I've been able to use my notoriety to do some fun things.
You have to, if you've got opportunity, if you have tools, you should use them.
I guess so. I hope so.
Yeah. All right, so let's move forward in time. Your recent book, A Universe from Nothing. This one is you talk about in the preface. You discuss how you try to, in this book, describe the simple experiments or describe experiments that will explain our universe and what we know about the universe currently.
Yeah, just a little, as you said at the beginning, just a little thing.
Little thing. Wow, I mean, that sounds like such a... Sure, let's just simply explain the experiments that explain what we know currently. Well, but wasn't that just a massive undertaking?
Well, in principle, maybe it was daunting. I don't know. No, what I wanted to do was do it in a non-daunting way, in a sense, because... and I'm glad they can see all the places they can purchase my book from. But anyway, what I wanted to do was celebrate one of the most remarkable intellectual journeys humans have ever taken. In 100 years, in a human lifetime, our vision of the universe has changed more than it did in 20 centuries. It's changed completely in a single human lifetime. Less than 100 years ago, the universe was static and eternal, and it consisted of one galaxy, our own. Mm-hmm. Now we know that there are more than 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe, and the universe is expanding, and it had a beginning 13.72 billion years ago. Everything's changed, and we're like the early map makers, just trying to begin to understand the universe on this larger scale. So it's not surprising we're surprised. And what I wanted to talk about was the revolutionary discoveries that have led to those surprises, some of which I'm happy to say I've been involved in, and do it in a short and accessible volume. In a way that wasn't intimidating. As you say, it sounds like an intimidating topic.
Yeah.
And I happen to think science books are better the shorter they are. And I wanted to do it in a way that was, short, but gave the story, gave people step by step the results and the experiments, so they could see why we have come to the conclusions we've come to. And in the process, the most amazing realization of all, perhaps, that we now plausibly could understand how a universe could come from nothing and address this question, which many people thought was a religious or philosophical question. Mm-hmm. Why is there something rather than nothing? And I argue in my book, much to the dismay of some cockamamie philosopher who happens to have just reviewed my book for the New York Times, I'm sad to say, who obviously, I think, read the introduction and the conclusion and not all the stuff in between because it actually involved physics.
Yeah.
It's not a philosophical question because something and nothing are by definition physical quantities. And therefore, if we want to understand those quantities, we have to think of physics. And physics has changed completely the definition and the sense of what we mean by something and nothing. And I wanted to describe all that and hopefully do it in a fun and accessible way. And I must say, while it was daunting, I was motivated by the fact that I happened to have given a lecture, which I really, was a spur-of-the-moment lecture in 2009 that happened to have been videotaped and put on the web and by my friend Richard Dawkins. It's had like 1.25 million views on YouTube. And by the time I decided to, I guess when the light finally went off my head, it had about 500,000 views. And I thought, wow, maybe people want to hear about this. Mm-hmm. And I thought if I condensed that in an hour, I could write a short book. And moreover, I'd had a lot of people, and I'd had an opportunity to debate with theologians and others since then. And I thought, well, not only will I have the opportunity to use what I did in the lecture in a short and way, but I could also expand upon the lecture in an exciting way and make a more complete discussion of those same topics. And so, there it is. And where I've been told, unfortunately, that my shirt matches perfectly with the background. But anyway.
The color correction is to be desired. But
yeah, I know, exactly. And anyway, and that's where I uttered this. It happened to have been at an American atheist convention, and I did a throwaway line. Well, I talked about the most poetic thing I know of in nature, which really is one of the most poetic things, is that we're all stardust, that every atom in your body and mine was once inside a star that exploded, and the atoms in your left hand may have come from a different star than your right hand. We really are star children, and I find that amazing, but I guess I uttered the throwaway line at the time, which just came to me on the spur of the moment, that forget Jesus, stars died so you'd be born, and
hence
I guess
the Miley Cyrus Twitter.
But actually, people don't understand that Twitter. She sent out a picture of me with that quote, and she said, beautiful. And her fans, got on her for saying, how could you, you're a Christian, how could you say that? But I've tried to explain to them that she wasn't talking about the quote, she was talking about me.
She was just blown away by the image.
By the image, I think it must be the case. I haven't had a chance to ask her, but I'm assuming that must be the case.
Yeah, well, the whole idea is, it really is a beautiful idea. It is very poetic, and the imagery is just incredible when you let your mind sit and kind of mull it over.
Well, it is these are the most amazing ideas that humans have ever come up with, and it's a shame that we don't share them more broadly. This is the most exciting intellectual adventure we've ever taken, and it's accessible. At least I think it is, and I think I could make it accessible. I tried, and I think we have an obligation to share it, but not just an obligation. It's the joy. You see, people think it's amazing that people think science. You have to be a scientist to be interested in science, and it's nowhere else in human culture that way. You don't have to be an artist to be interested in art. You don't have to be a musician to like rock music or classical music. You don't have to be a novelist to enjoy good novels. But somehow people think you have to be a scientist to enjoy science. And I view science as just like art, music, and literature in the sense that its benefit is to change our perspective of our place in the cosmos. And what greater way to change our perspective of our place in the cosmos than to think about the cosmos and to realize that we may, in fact, be able to understand that we're here by a remarkable series of physical accidents. And if the universe has no purpose, well, so be it. It may not be something you like, but as I try and point out, the universe isn't the way it is, so you can like it. It doesn't care what you like.
So do you subscribe to the anthropic principle then? I
don't subscribe to anything. But
no
the
magazines, no.
Well, I do, actually, a few, but I don't adhere to them. The anthropic principle is interesting, and I talk about it a lot in the book, because it suggests that even the laws of physics that are so central to our existence may themselves just be a cosmic accident. There may be many different universes with different laws of physics, and ours are just, if they were any different, we wouldn't be here to measure them. In which case, the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is is quite trite. I mean, it's just that if there were nothing, we wouldn't be here to ask why there were nothing. And to some extent, that's a simple resolution. If there are many universes and there's nothing in most places, then we wouldn't be surprised to find ourselves where there's something. In fact, we'd be quite surprised to find ourselves where there was nothing. It would be much more surprising to find ourselves living in a universe in which we couldn't live. And but you know, I'm not saying I find it a very depressing thought at the same time, because as a physicist, I was kind of brought up with the idea of trying to explain why the universe has to be the way it is. And that may not ultimately be the case. And so, but as I point out in the end of the book, again, giving away the punchline, I suppose, at the very end, that because I can't do that, I can't, I guess, delay gratification, I suppose. That if you think about that, even if the laws of physics are an accident and there are many universes, Einstein asked the question, did God have any choice in the creation of the universe? And by God, he didn't mean God, of course, because he wasn't a religious person. He meant the God of Spinoza, if you want, the idea that there's order in the universe. But he certainly knew the idea of a personal God was nonsense, and he said so. But what he really meant by that is, are there one set of physical laws that allow a consistent reality? And if you tweaked anything and changed anything, would all of reality fall apart? Or are there many different possible physical realities? And that's the question that we all are interested in. I certainly have been. And so if there's just one physical reality that's possible, then God had no choice in the creation of the universe. God, quote unquote. But it's what I realized in writing the book is that even if there are many universes, if the only ones are the ones in which we can live are the ones which have the constants of nature that we measure, then even a God would have no choice in the creation of us. So either way, God is redundant at best. And I find that very satisfying.
For you, satisfying. For others, maybe not so much.
Well,
but
yeah, I mean, but let me just point out, I don't describe myself as an atheist. I'm much more like my late friend, Christopher Hitchens. I describe myself as an anti-theist. Namely, I don't have the presumption to say that there's no purpose or God, or there's no God but all I can say is I wouldn't want to live in a universe with one. Not with some Saddam Hussein in the sky, no.
Yeah. In the question,
you're probably losing viewers even as I speak. Anyway.
or gaining them.
Yeah,
you never know.
Right. Miley, I hope you're out there. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, Miley. Maybe Miley watches my show. We should find out. In terms of the question of the just so universe and having all of the factors, the parameters of the universe the way that they are. I remember a study that I read something on archive.org a while
it's good
back.
That you read that.
Yeah, I check it out occasionally. Read something, a study that had done calculations and determined that the parameters of our universe actually aren't perfect, and that we are just shy of what would be the perfect parameters.
Well, I think first of all, it's presumptuous. That's the part of the big problem with the anthropic principle. I've written articles about it. In fact, we don't know. I mean, it's ridiculous. We don't know if the parameters are fine-tuned for life because we don't know all the different kinds of intelligent life that can exist. We don't even know if we're typical of intelligent life in the universe. Right. So it's ridiculous to suggest that we know that the parameters are fine-tuned for us, and that if we didn't change a lot of them in the same if you change one, well, we may find that we couldn't exist. And in fact, that's true for the energy of empty space, which I talk about in the book. But we don't know if we change a lot of them in concert, that you couldn't result in a better universe or one that life could exist in. And so we don't even know the set of possibilities, much less the probability distribution. So most of the anthropic principle arguments are just talk. They don't have any meat. And therefore, really what they do is parameterize our ignorance. And they're suggestive but never compelling.
Do you cover quite the uncertainties about what we know about our universe in the book?
Of course. I mean, I think it's important to point out what what's great about the difference between science and religion is that in religion you assume the answers before you ask the questions. But in science, our faith is ultimately quite shakable. As I've often said, if you're a theorist, at least, the two most exciting states to be in are either wrong or confused. And I'm often both. But I think the fact that our pictures have changed and that there are things we don't understand are vitally important. If you want to talk about science, you have to talk about that. And uncertainty, some people think, is a limitation of science, but in fact, it's one of its great strengths. Because in science, you can actually parameterize your uncertainties on the whole. You can talk about what level of confidence you have in certain things, and it's one of the few areas of human endeavor where you can do that. So uncertainty is a beautiful thing. In fact, I recently wrote about that. It's in some compilation that's coming out in some book by a lot of scientists. But I wrote about the fact that I thought one of the most important scientific ideas that could be understood more broadly is uncertainty, because it's a beautiful concept.
Yeah, and unfortunately with today's media environment, it's something that's very, very hard to get across to the general public, because you have, medical studies that say aspirin is good for you, medical studies says aspirin's bad, Diet Coke is good, Diet Coke is bad, whatever. That's
because they're all done with 3 people.
Yeah, exactly. We need the giant meta studies.
You see, that's what we're lucky, and that's why I do physics instead. One of the many reasons why I do physics instead of medicine. It's just a lot easier. We can study billions of particles and say things with confidence, but studying humans is so much harder.
You can say things with confidence as you get more and more data, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right now they're getting more confident about things like the Higgs boson.
Well, but not enough to say it's really there.
Right.
But it's enough. It's amazing what we talk about as levels of confidence, because I think there's a big problem with statistics, in fact, because in physics, we won't, especially particle physics, we don't believe it unless it's something like 5 sigma. Mm-hmm. And 5 sigma is like a confidence 99.999% or something like that, maybe 5 decimal places. Whereas most of it, if that were really true, if that confidence level is really true, I think we'd say with a 95% confidence, we're pretty confident. But in fact, a lot of the times, stuff that's stated with a 95% confidence level it turns out to be wrong. So we're very conservative, and yeah, there's a great deal of evidence that maybe we've discovered the Higgs particle, but not enough for us to say, "Damn it, it's really there." And I shouldn't have said "damn it," but I just did.
That's okay. We'll let you slide on that one.
I think that's one I can use.
Yeah. That one's all right. FCC regulations, but we're on the internet, so
yeah. Okay, well, I'll start being more crude if you want. No, I'm just joking.
Dr. Kiki's insulting hour? No, I don't know.
I have a lot of. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to. I'm biting my lip. Okay.
I've always been intrigued by the idea of the universe.
By the way, I noticed we're episode 137.
Yes.
That's wonderful. I'm so lucky. Do you know what 137 is?
Not off 137, the first prime numbers.
No, and no, there's another prime in between. But anyway, and 1 isn't often considered a prime. 2 is a prime, by the way. But anyway,
all right.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. I just keep pedantic. But no, 1 over 137 is the fine structure constant. One of the most important constants in nature. Well, it's 137 point something. So I'm very honored to be episode 137. And completely irrelevant, but I couldn't resist when I saw what it was. Anyway.
I like irrelevant, but yet relevant.
Okay,
tangents.
Me too.
Yeah, it's fun. It's good. For the getting back to the idea of the universe and something from nothing, one of the chapters is talking about what nothing is. And you mentioned earlier that physics has given something and nothing real tangible value and shape. And in physics, even when you're looking at the universe, I mean, nothing never really... It's never really nothing. You've got
nothing and something are almost indistinguishable.
Yeah.
Actually, I spend more than one chapter on nothing because I try and sequentially talk about the different kinds of nothing, which is, again, something this moron philosopher didn't realize. So, anyway, he picked up on one and left it there. But because one has to be more subtle. And I try to be careful and honest in the book about this because so the simplest kind of nothing is just empty space, right? That's the kind of nothing that I think the classical philosophers and the theologians would have meant as nothing, an eternal empty void in the Bible or whatever you want. And that kind of nothing is definitely not nothing. It's full of elementary particles that are popping in and out of existence in a timescale so short we can't measure them. And moreover, I show that once you add gravity into the mix, that kind of nothing is inevitably unstable. Empty space will always create particles. if you wait long enough. And you'll eventually be able to fill up a universe with stuff when you start it with nothing. And there's no magic required. It doesn't violate conservation of energy. It doesn't require God. It doesn't require anything. Now, that in principle would answer the question, why is there something rather than nothing? But then you could say, as I try and point out, that that's not nothing. And in fact, that's true because you've got space there. Where did the space come from? And I spend time showing that, in fact, if you apply quantum mechanics to gravity, then, in fact, even space itself can pop in and out of existence. Where you can create universes where there were none before, spontaneously. And, in fact, certain universes will survive long enough for life to exist. And, in fact, if you look at the characteristics of our universe, it has precisely the characteristics you would expect of a universe that was created from nothing. So that's fascinating. But then I say, well, you know, if you're really picky, because, in fact, the theologians, whenever I define a nothing, they say that's not nothing. And obviously philosophers like this. Anyway, I'm not going to call him a moron again. But obviously some philosophers say, well, that's not nothing because you can create something from it. Anything you create something from is nothing. But anyway, they'd say, okay, well, you got rid of the particles, you got rid of the space, but what about the laws themselves? And then, as I point out, and we've already discussed, maybe even the laws themselves arose spontaneously with our universe. And if that's the case, it seems to me that's the last coffin on the notion that you can't create something from nothing. And in fact, as I point out, ultimately, the question of something from nothing is not an interesting question. Why you can create something from nothing is no more interesting than the question, why are there, as Plato or as Kepler might have said, why are there 5 planets, or Plato might have said, or Platonic solids? Why are there 5 planets? Well, they're now 8. Actually, for me, there are always 9. Pluto will always be a planet.
I grew up with those textbooks, too.
I grew up with Pluto. My daughter did a project on Pluto when she was in grade 4, and I don't want her to have to go back and repeat. So Pluto will always be a planet for me. And but anyway, you can ask, why are there 9 planets? Well, it sounds like a profound question, but what you're really asking is, how are there 9 planets? And what are the different? How many different signs of solar systems can exist? And we're looking at all of that, and it's not an interesting question anymore. And the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is not the interesting question. The interesting question is, how did our universe evolve, and how can we find out? And those are the interesting questions that are productive. And getting hung up on these ancient philosophical questions that really don't have the same meaning now that they did before is not very productive. And ultimately, even that's what I try and discuss, is that what's really much more exciting is, sure, we can show that a universe might have come from nothing. By the way, I never claim it did. All I claim is that it's plausible.
It's plausible.
And and again, I read these reviews by people who say, how dare he say that, this is science has proved this, and I never. It's just plausible. But even the fact that it's plausible, it seems to me, is an amazing thing that's worth celebrating. That we have come to the threshold that these questions which science avoided addressing are now in the realm where at least scientists can begin to address them. And I find that amazing. And again, we're celebrating.
And part of it has to do with how far we've come with technology, our ability to address the questions, whereas before you couldn't even think of a way to begin to address the question, whereas now we have giant atom smashers, and we're looking at the beginnings of our universe, just seconds after the Big Bang, and there are amazing experiments that we're able to do now.
Well, that's the point. I think the key point is that, and I say it in the book, and I say it in general, is that every time we open a new window on the universe, we're surprised. That's why it's worth continuing to ask questions, not by just thinking about it, because if you just, pure thought wouldn't have led us anywhere. It's the technologies that open up new windows on the universe that keep astounding us, because the universe has an imagination that's much greater than our own, and we need to keep probing the universe if we want to move forward. And so you're right, we open up new telescopes, new particle accelerators, and we get remarkable new insights in the universe, which we never could have anticipated for the most part.
How do you see, in terms of moving forward with our understanding of the universe, we're looking at expansion of the universe. There are different hypotheses on the big chill, the big crunch. Where do you see things going?
Well, they go to hell. The universe, as I point out, the future is miserable. And we live...
Either way, it's miserable.
It's miserable no matter what, but we live in possibly the worst of all possible universes for the future of life, which is so much for, therefore, a universe created for us. In fact, the two things that I like people to take away from the book are, first, you are insignificant beyond your wildest dreams. And secondly, the future is miserable. Take those away and be happy with it.
So you're an ego crusher, a dream crusher, and you want people to be happy.
I want people to be happy because I don't want to crush your ego and dreams. I want to say, look, but it's still amazing that we're here with our intellects, able to understand and ask questions about the universe. Enjoy our brief moment in the sun.
Yeah.
Make the meaning of the meaning in your life is the meaning you make of it. But in any case, the future of the universe, as I talk about in the book, and it's a future that's somewhat like Charles Dickens' Christmas Tale. It's the future as it might be, because we can't say for certain that it's our future. But if this energy that's dominating the expansion of the universe persists, then what will happen is all the galaxies we now see will eventually be moving away from us faster than the speed of light. And when they do that, they'll disappear, and the universe will become cold and dark and empty. And in fact, as I point out poetically, in the far future, astronomers on some distant planet and around some star in our meta-galaxy at that time, hundreds of billions of years from now, will discover the laws of physics and build telescopes, but they'll look out and they'll think they live in the universe we thought we lived in 100 years ago, where there was just one galaxy and it was static and eternal. And that's what they'll think, and they'll be wrong. So we're living at, as I like to point out, we're living at a very special time in the history of the universe, the only time when we can say we're living at a very special time. But actually, that's facetious. But in the future, eventually the future will become cold and dark and empty. And in fact, that motivated Christopher Hitchens, who was writing the foreword for my new book before he became too ill and died, unfortunately. I mean, he would say to me when I explained this to him, he said, well, that means nothing is heading towards us as fast as can be. So another answer to the question, the ultimate answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is just wait, there won't be for long.
I like that. It kind of makes me think of, instead of the whole turtles all the way down description of the universe, it's more a universe as a Mobius strip, making its way
the universe is... Well, my friend and in many ways mentor, a colleague of mine, Sheldon Glashow, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, used the example of the Ouroboros. I don't know. You know what an Ouroboros is? It's this Indian
snake eating its tail.
The snake that eats its own tail. In some sense, the universe is like that because the universe is expanding. The structures on the largest scales are related to the structures on the smallest scales. That's why elementary particle physicists like me do cosmology, because in fact, ultimately, the entire universe was contained in a region smaller than the size of an atom. I wrote a whole book about it called Atom. And that means that the fundamental forces and structures that govern nature on the small scales ultimately determine the structures on the largest scales. So as you go back to the largest scales, you come back to the smallest scales again. And they're tied together irrevocably.
We're at the end of our show. I really appreciate your time today. This has been just a really fun conversation, and I wish you're already a bestseller with this book, but I wish you more best-selling luck, and I hope you the best in your budding relationship with Miley Cyrus.
Oh, thank you very much, and thank you. And it's been a real pleasure to be on and to talk to you.
It's
be part of your
great.
program.
Thank you.
Okay,
take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Everybody, I hope you enjoyed this last hour. Our guest was Dr. Lawrence Krauss, and if you are interested in more of what we were talking about today, you can go to his website, which is, let me see if I can get to the web address here. Where did it go? It went away. Oh, there it is. Krauss, krauss.faculty.asu.edu. krauss.faculty.asu.edu. So you can find more information there and links to be able to purchase his multiple books. He's a prolific and very entertaining and understandable writer. So I hope that you'll find some fun stuff there among his writings. I am Dr. Kiki, and this has been the Science Hour. Until next week, you can find my science-y pursuits out in the interwebs. I am Dr. Kiki. Search for me out there. You'll find me Twitter, Facebook, Google+, all those places that people interact. You can subscribe to this show in the TWiT network. Go to twit.tv/Kiki. And if you need more science-y goodness, you can also download my show, This Week in Science. twist.org is the website for that, and we talk about science-y good news that we enjoy. I will see you next week. I thank you very much for tuning into my hour. And remember, all I ask is this 1 hour a week, and I do hope that it makes your life, your world, a whole lot more interesting. Now for your science meditation of the week. Robo-jellyfish. It's not enough to know that our oceans are going to be taken over by real jellyfish at some point thanks to climate change and overfishing. We also have to worry about robo-jellyfish.